So I just wanted to give you just a little bit of sense of myself. I know it's always strange when somebody just shows up. I wish the person that made the comment would have stayed, because I think I'll say some things that are relevant to her concerns. Not that I am in any way a substitute for a brown-eyed person or a dark-skinned person, but there's so many issues here to unpack, and there's so many things I could potentially get into. I'm going to talk fast, and I'm going to go through a lot of material. It's just what I tend to do. But at any point, if you feel like, wow, you're glossing over something, or I'd really like some clarification, feel free to interrupt me.
Is your talk on the web anywhere?
I testified at the U.S. Senate recently, and they got that up on YouTube. You just put in Kraska testimony on YouTube. And when I walked into that room, I had a little folder with me, and it said the old hippie phrase, "Speak truth to power." And in fact, actually it said, "Keep calm and speak truth to power." And it was fun, and it was an amazing experience to do that, and to get all the feedback and everything. And at the end, I'll talk a little bit about some of the outcomes of what I did and what happened. That has me a bit depressed, but hell, that's the nature of the beast when you're talking about resistance. So I've got 3 kids. One of them is 22 years old and is working on a Fulbright research fellowship in Indonesia. And I just spent a month over there with her, and she's learned the language, and we are doing research together over there. And guess what, on police militarization. She's doing it from the environmental side, illegal logging and things like that. And of course, I've made a connection with one of the 3 commissioners of the Indonesian National Police, Adrianus Miliana, and he's in charge of 421,000 people. And so we hung out for a month together, my daughter, him, and we went to all different kinds of places in Indonesia. I have a 6-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old daughter. And I thoroughly enjoy life, just despite how depressing this is going to be. Sometimes these things are really hard to get through. I did not like watching that documentary, for example. That makes me uncomfortable. It pisses me off. You realize how little has changed, and in what kind of intensely bad direction we just continue to head. So I hope I can give you some sense of hope in spaces and places, but don't hold your breath. I wanted to, first of all, give you a real quick overview of what I've been up to for the last 25 years. I promise it'll be fast. And just kind of a big picture. Because a lot of people hear this notion of police militarization and they think it's almost a policy discussion. They think it's, what are you going to do about police militarization? And are you talking about fixing police militarization? Well, it's actually a really important, I think, intellectual exercise and theoretical exercise to get at the notion of police militarization from a broad perspective. I mean, the whole notion of the modern nation state, democratic modern nation state, was a clear delineation between civilian policing and U.S. armed forces. That was like one of the original tenets of democratic governance. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't a scam. Possibly it was. Possibly they said, let's just make these people act a little bit differently and dress a little bit differently, and let's leave these people, and they'll do external security and they'll do internal security, wink, wink, but they're all one and the same, and we've just duped them all. Maybe. But we do know that the idea of civilian policing around the world is a tenet of democratic governance. And we do know that when we think of militarization, we can't think of, are they militarized? And I will talk about this more in a second. Are they militarized or are they not militarized? That's silly. Of course they're militarized. They're paramilitary. The key is, and what I'll talk about at length here in a minute, is the extent to which they're militarized. Where do they fall on the continuum? Are they extremely militarized or are they barely militarized? That's consequential. That leads to extreme suffering versus being fairly responsive to the people that they're serving. depending on where they fall on that continuum. So it's not just a silly policy-based issue. There's a lot to it. Well, one of the things I noticed 26 years ago, as part of Ronald Reagan's drug war, I don't know how many of you all remember or were even around, but Ronald Reagan launched this intensely punitive drug war. Of course, this was only a continuation of other drug wars. But when Len Bias, a basketball player, died, that was an NBA player, died, everybody said, oh, it's a cocaine overdose, and he must have been smoking this new thing called crack cocaine, and all kinds of crazy things were happening. And so in 1985, the drug war really got kicked off. And what I noticed is that the US military itself, because of the end of the Cold War, started really getting involved in domestic law enforcement, and they also started really getting involved in international law enforcement. And so it struck me as peculiar that the US military was becoming, Army General Colonel Dunlap's words, Army General Dunlap's words, politicized. The US military was becoming politicized, and rapidly. The US military justified it all under the demise of the Cold War. We don't have much of a reason for existence. We sure as hell don't want this peacetime dividend to occur, so we got to find something to do. And politicians pushed them into it, but they also embraced it themselves. And so I began studying and writing about the politicization of the military, more so than the militarization of policing. And then, of course, that led me inevitably down the path of hanging out with students that were active duty military folks that were training local SWAT members on how to do sniper work and how to do Navy SEALs type entries on people's private residences. Of course, this was a long time ago, and I was shocked that it was happening, but I knew it was happening probably all over the place. So here we have the flip side of the coin, where not the politicization of the military, but the militarization of police. This is just, by the way, a quick example of what went on in some of the Iraq War. The military refers to crime control and drug war activity and some terrorist activities, low intensity conflict. Sometimes they call it operations other than war. Sometimes they call it asymmetrical warfare. And here's an example of a US soldier after doing a home raid, having the occupants, just like that happens in this country 600 times a day, taking the occupants and marking them with a Sharpie so they can identify them later on. Great example of policing in a foreign country. So back to my other point. So what I noticed in looking at one side of the coin and the other side of the coin is that clearly these were coalescing. I never predicted that they were going to coalesce. I knew that our government is too deceitful and too scared about the notion of them coalescing, that they would actually let them coalesce completely. But they were going to coalesce in significant ways, to the point where war and the military and the police and law enforcement would all become increasingly blurry. So I ended up looking at the big picture of this, and this would take me quite a while to tease out, but I'm sure y'all can click into it. You seem like a fascinating crowd. Here's a visual example of the fading distinction between the police, the military, the public. Of course, you've got your Blackwater folks now, where you got private and public blurring. You've got war and law enforcement, and this is an advertisement that says, come to our training camp, we will train you no matter what the mission. Tons of for-profit training camps all over the United States of America that train both the military and the police, all in the same sorts of ways. Yes?
So this is a Blackwater ad for their camps?
This was actually a different for-private training camp called the Olive Security Training Center. Yeah, there's a bunch of them though. And unfortunately, I'm working with quite a few investigative journalists. I get everyone else to do my work for me now. That are doing really good work looking into what these for-profit training camps are doing, because it really has a lot to do with the police moving rapidly and in an intense way down the militarization continuum. So I talked about how this is all coalescing into a new security industrial complex. One of the things that motivated me academically early on is back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, academics talked a lot about how the state was ratcheting back its use of violence and force. And there was a lot of talk of all the soft controls and the surveillance controls and all that kind of thing. And of course, that's true. Absolutely no doubt. But academics have an amazing way of saying if something is ascending, then something else must be descending. And of course, what they didn't realize is that, yes, something was ascending, the soft controls, surveillance, all that shit going on, but rapidly we were seeing the ascension behind the stage, so the iron fist and the velvet glove, right? It was ascending as well. But academics were ignoring that. In fact, after I was writing about it and publishing about it, and nobody could have given two craps about what I was saying. In fact, some of them assumed that I was some rightist criminologist that was all cranked up about things like Waco and black helicopters. And I'm anything, by the way, farthest thing from a rightist criminologist. Another assumption folks have made is this is all about 9/11. 9/11 post 9/11, that everything has gone to hell since 9/11. We all got scared, and one of the things I hope you can tell already is that this is a really complex phenomenon and it has a complex history. There's a lot to it. This stuff was absolutely growing exponentially long before 9/11. And 9/11, yes, has been an accelerant, no doubt. It's been a catalyst for further militarization, but it's certainly not what has caused it. Since Seattle happened in 1999, right? So let's get this out of the way. Organizing concepts, police militarization defined. This is just my little definition, but it's very simple. The process by which civilian police increasingly draw from and pattern themselves around the tenets of militarism and the military model. Very simple. I think it's important, though, to recognize that militarization can be seen as not just a politically pejorative kind of concept. In other words, a rallying cry, that it actually has substance to it. I mean, there can be a lot to it, and there is a lot to it. If you look, this is probably going to be very hard to see, so I'll just make it quick. This is an example of 4 different militarization continuums. In other words, there are 4 dimensions of militarization. If we want to think about it in a more exacting, scholarly way, to help us think clearly about it, we have to understand that militarism has 4 dimensions. One dimension is material. That's what everyone's up in arms right now about, the 1033 program, and police departments are getting all these military goods, the material stuff. Armored personnel carriers, Heckler and Koch MP5s, semi-automatic weapons, all this kind of stuff. Lots of fun. Cultural indicators, though, are another part. Not just the material goods, but also the cultural aspects. So indices of militarism, battle dress uniforms, high and tight haircuts. I can't tell you how many cops, we at Eastern Kentucky University, we have a law enforcement training center right next to us. And I can't tell you how many cops now have their hair cut completely shaved with just the Marine hair right here and the sunglasses. That's the militaristic culture, and we have to look at that carefully. In fact, I want to make an argument that the cultural part of it may be the most important part of it because it's the part of it that makes it the most intractable. Organizational indicators, how are they organized? Well, are they the lone cop on the beat walking the streets? Or are they taking, in our research that I'll talk about in a second, showed that 20%, and I suspect it's 30%, 20% of police departments now are taking their SWAT teams. And they're using those SWAT teams for random patrol in, quote, high crime neighborhoods. They do jump outs on cars, and they do no-knock searches on people's private residences as they're going down the street. Sometimes they're an armored personnel carrier, other times they get in regular patrol cars, but they're still all dressed up that way. 20 to 25% are doing that today. That's an indication that organizationally, things are changing. It's also an indication that militarization is not just about protest policing. It's not just about no-knock drug raids. It is becoming a normalized part of the police institution. And if I had a chalkboard, I'd do my typical professorial thing, and I would write in big letters, tactical. Tactical today is nothing more than a synonym for paramilitary or paramilitarization. Everything is becoming tactical. You have a tactical revolver. You have a tactical body armor. You use tactical techniques. All of those are indicators, cultural indicators, but also organizational indicators. And then finally, we have operational indicators. What the heck are they actually doing operationally? So what I want to do next is I want to go through just a couple of different slides, and I want to talk about some important things that have occurred and some important features of this militarization trend, because I know y'all are here to honor the anniversary, but we have to understand the larger context of what's going on in police militarization, because it's really impacting in an ugly damn way, and has been for a long time now, communities of color and economically disenfranchised communities. Deadly drug raids. Modesto, California, previous to 9/11 in the year 2000, Modesto, California is doing a joint operation drug exercise with the federal government. Very common now, very common now. You know, you have law enforcement scholars have really, I think, missed the boat on the extent to which local law enforcement is becoming so intertwined with federal and state law enforcement. So the Modesto PD is involved in that kind of thing. They have some real slim kind of evidence that something might be going on in a household. They go to the household, the federal government says, Modesto PD, would you please do a raid on this house? They of course say yes. They get their SWAT team together. They break into the house at 4 o'clock in the morning. The whole family's asleep. They don't have any intelligence that there's kids in the house, but there are kids in the house. They throw in flashbang grenades that go off and disorient everybody. They storm through the house. They grab Alberto out of his bed, 11 years old, throw him onto the floor, and a SWAT officer puts a foot on his back, and he's holding a shotgun over him. Nobody knows how it happens, but it goes off. And he kills him, shoots him in the back, and kills him. Anybody know who Johnny Cochran is? Yeah, Johnny Cochran won a $3 million judgment against Modesto PD. It ended up leading to a major, who's ever heard of this, by the way? A major California SWAT reform effort. I served on that SWAT reform effort. It was all kinds of stuff that could have been talked about, but nobody cared back then. Except Modesto and a few other people. But nationally, nobody cared. Why do you think they didn't care? I'm asking. Yeah, these were drug dealers, right? Well, it turns out that the father didn't have any kind of arrest record. No drugs were found. It was just a horrible tragedy all around. And and I can tell you, I can get into a long discussion because I work a lot with police, and I get a long discussion. But I ended up working a little bit with the Modesto PD, and we hear a lot of stories about police being callous. God, we have that one grandmother story where a SWAT team shot the grandmother and they let her bleed to death for 5 minutes while she's handcuffed and she's pleading, would you please get me help? Let her lay there and bleed in her living room and then planted evidence to indicate that she, we hear those kind of stories, but I can tell you those Modesto police officers were devastated. I mean, it just destroyed their worlds. And we have to look at those things as well. And Modesto, to this day, they disbanded their SWAT team and they did all kinds of things. But that has happened again and again and again and again and again and again and again in smaller communities in local areas, but nobody's ever put it all together. And despite me talking to the Washington Times, New York Times, trying to lay this crap out, Radley Balco, my good friend, writing a book, Warrior Cops, trying to get this crap out, nobody's really cared. Situationally they have, but certainly not the big picture. And I think we'll talk in a little bit about why. So we have the normalization of police militarization in the form of contraband raids. This, you know, if you ever see a SWAT statistic, it came from my damn research. And it just gets regurgitated again and again and again, and people make up numbers, and they call me and they say, is this number correct? And I'll say, I have no idea where you got that number, but no, it's not correct, and again and again. But right now, in the year 2000, we have in the year 2014, my best guesstimate is about 65,000 SWAT raids a year. Remember that these aren't for terrorism, they're not for barricaded suspects, they're not for hostages. They are almost all, not all, but almost all, for low-level drug infractions. Now, you might say, well, why are cops doing this crap? I ran into one of the heads of the National Tactical Officers Association, and you can tell this guy's been a cop for a long time, and he's very Marine-like, but you can tell now he's become quite reflexive. He works for the National Tactical Officers Association, which has 40,000 members, and he's out there trying to reform SWAT. He really wants to reform SWAT. He tells me, and of course I knew this already, but it was great to hear it come out of his mouth. He said, this is after the US Senate testimony, he says, Kraska, do you know why this shit took off like it did? I'm like, I don't know, why don't you tell me? And he said, civil asset forfeiture.
Yeah.
Civil asset forfeiture.
Yeah.
One of the brilliant ways that police departments can generate a slush fund outside of the normal tax base of dollars. He said that what motivated much of that then and increasingly today is being able to collect not criminal evidence, but actually illegal cash, illegal guns, illegal property, etc. Of course, it's not necessarily illegal. And the Washington Post, by the way, just did a wonderful 4-part series on civil asset forfeiture. It's one of the best things that I've seen. And again, I'm frustrated with academia because they're not writing about this kind of stuff right now. They do, they fit it into little articles and stuff, but we don't have an intense group of academics that are really studying this stuff like they ought to be. And I'm getting too old and tired to. Let's see if this works.
Members of a Des Moines family say they were terrorized when Ankeny police burst into their home without knocking, and they say somebody could have been hurt or worse, killed because of it. Aaron Brobeck has the story. It's new at 10.
I've been so traumatized I don't sleep at night.
Sally Prince is afraid to stay in her Des Moines home. She isn't afraid of burglars breaking in. She's afraid of the police. On Thursday, Ankeny police executed a search warrant at her home looking for someone they suspected of using stolen credit cards to buy clothes and electronics. The whole search was caught on surveillance video. Ankeny police tell us they knocked first, but the video tells a different story. It shows one officer pounding on the side of the house. Seconds later, officers use a battering ram to force their way in. Prince's son, Justin Ross, was in the bathroom at the time, and he was armed with a gun that he's legally allowed to carry when an officer kicked the door.
I stood up, I drew my weapon, I started to get myself together to come out the door. I heard somebody out in the main room say police, and I reholstered my weapon, I sat back down, and I put my hands in my lap.
If the officer had gotten in the bathroom on the first kick, the story probably would have had a different ending.
I would have been standing there with my weapon drawn, pointed at the doorway, and they probably would have shot me.
This was over property purchased with a stolen credit card. It doesn't make any sense that they would go to such extremes for something that simple.
Police apparently did not find any of the items they were looking for in the warrant. They did arrest 2 people who were staying with the family on unrelated charges. Miranda Scigliano was charged with a probation violation. Richard Adair was charged with possession of drugs with intent to deliver. The family believes the police were also trying to cover up the way they were executing the warrant by covering up and, in one case, even ripping out a security camera. You can see this officer spots the security camera in front of the house and then rips it right out. Another officer spots this video camera downstairs and covers it up. The family says if the police had knocked, they would have opened the door and allowed the officers to search the home. Now they say they're scared the police may come back.
The police are supposed to protect and serve, not make you in fear of them. And I'm totally terrified of them now.
Ankeny police executed the warrant in Des Moines because the alleged theft took place in Ankeny, but the suspects live in Des Moines. Now, Ankeny police say they do not have any written policy governing how they conduct search warrants, and they cannot comment any further on this because it's considered an ongoing investigation.
Police always.
All right. So let's go back to 1993. A little chapter in American history that nobody wants to talk about. Journalists don't want to talk about it with me, and I don't bother talking to them about it because I know it's going to get misinterpreted. I don't mind talking to you all about it. I don't mind it actually being recorded because I hope I can clarify my comments and make it real clear what this is all about. I think Waco was a watershed moment in American militarization. Here we had active duty military special operations folks working in sync and directly with local law enforcement to prosecute probably one of the most tragic police exercises in U.S. history. 86 people were killed, 26 were children. Remember the CS gas you saw? Autopsies revealed that upwards of 12 of those children probably died just from CS gas poisoning. The people that carried out the final raid of the Waco compound absolutely knew there were children in there, and they absolutely knew they were putting lethal levels of CS gas into the place. Notice how, by the way, I just called it a damn compound. We don't know if it was a compound. It's a place where a whole bunch of families lived together. Yeah, they had some strange religious beliefs for some of us, etc., but a compound where a whole bunch of families lived together. Housing. The final assault was just unbelievable. I don't know how many of y'all were around to watch it, but it was just sickening. I ended up working on the Timothy McVeigh versus United States case. And the prosecutor asked me to testify and the defense side asked me to testify, which was very weird because they both wanted some insight into Timothy McVeigh's thinking. So I did get to talk to Timothy McVeigh. I also read a lot of what Timothy McVeigh had to say. Timothy McVeigh was somebody, by the way, Timothy McVeigh, I forget that a lot of y'all are young. Timothy McVeigh was a ex-US soldier, came back from the Iraq War, the Gulf War, came back from the war, got disenfranchised with the US government, drove a fuse-lit bomb in a rental truck in front of the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, detonated, killed 168 people. Brutal, horrible act of terrorism. So what was he up to? Of course, people want to say he's evil and crazy and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying what he didn't wasn't evil. Feel free to put that label on it, but I can tell you this. It was all about payback. It was no different than any of the damn movies you watch. Any of the damn movies you watch where somebody is horribly angry at some injustice and they're going to make somebody pay. And of course, he made them pay in the way that he was trained to make people pay. He blew them up. And he was proud of it. And he went to the electric chair. Maybe he was, I don't remember if I think he got the electric chair. Anyway, he was killed by the US government under the death penalty, and the entire time he never broke his exact same position, one iota. It was revenge for Waco and Ruby Ridge. So this kind of police militarization is going to have consequences. And of course, in this situation, it had horrible consequences all the way around. It's a tragic, tragic story. Here's another one, Katrina. Notice how this is progressing a little bit, right? Here we have Katrina. Amazing story. I'm going to tell it very quickly because I'm already running out of time. I got tons of stuff to get through. I'll tell it very quickly. Amazing story, though. Here we have FEMA. FEMA has always done a fairly good job in U.S. history of responding in a humanitarian way to big damn disasters. They've got a pretty good track record. It's actually not been historically a bad organization, believe it or not. They're all about humanitarian relief. 9/11 happens. FEMA gets put under the Department of Homeland Security. And guess what Department of Homeland Security does? They make them adopt a mindset of security first, humanitarian aid second. And of course, it's for the African Americans that live in New Orleans. So the aftermath of Katrina hit, it took them 4 damn days to give any real humanitarian relief. Why? Because all of this was happening. Blackwater was patrolling the streets, the National Guard, and SWAT teams from everywhere. Why were they there? Not to hand out water bottles. So it was another key event in American history where the militarization of policing became a central feature of even something as simple as not something as tragic as responding to a disastrous, a natural disaster. And then we have, of course, Occupy, the Miami model. We could have watched a documentary on Miami, real freaking mess, and the Ferguson situation. I don't even know what to say about this. There's a lot of things I could get into, but I can tell you that, this kind of thing is, with a sniper up on the armored personnel carrier. And by the way, this wasn't Ferguson PD, this was St. Louis County. And this is the norm. This is the norm. And I don't want to give anybody a hard time for misunderstanding some things. A lot of people think this has to do with the Department of Defense and the federal government giving away goodies. These departments have been buying this stuff since 1988. They've been buying this stuff forever. And the problem isn't supply. The problem is there's a demand for it. Kind of like with the drug war, you're going to try to affect demand or supply. Well, the problem isn't supply. You could cut off 1030. 1033 could go away tomorrow. Nothing would change. Why? They would take $275,000 of Department of Homeland Security money and still buy an armored personnel carrier. They would take out $150,000 out of their civil asset forfeiture slush fund and still find a way to buy MP5s or new Heckler & Koch weaponry for their whole SWAT team. They'd figure out a way to do it. Why? Because the demand is there, because police culture dictates it today. So, I want to talk about a culture war. What's going on in policing? What's going on in policing? There's some amazing things that have been happening. And, it's kind of like climatologists. I doubt any of them are going to be real excited that they were right, that everything goes to shit and we start seeing mass extinction. Oh God, I was right. All those damn right-wing naysayers. Kind of the same thing with me. I don't take any great joy out of being right about how community policing never had a chance. Community policing never had a chance. This was a massive federal effort. And I think for a lot of people, I know firsthand, for a lot of people, a very sincere effort to democratize police services, to get it to change, to create structural changes, organizational changes, cultural changes, really make a difference. And in some departments it's worked. Remember, we have 18,000 different departments in the United States of America, and some of them have really embraced it, and they've done a pretty damn good job with it. As journalists are always saying, okay, tell me which ones. I'll write you out a list. They have. I'm not saying they're not flawed, but they have. But the efforts were doomed from the get-go for a lot of reasons. One of the things I uncovered in my militarization research is that a lot of departments were taking community policing funds and they were just simply shuffling their budgets around so they could pay for militarization. Yeah. And the cops they didn't really impact the culture of the police department. The cops are still calling it pejorative things like grin and wave policing or mamby-pamby policing or limp wrist policing and all kinds of stuff. There was not a lot of respect in a lot of different departments, particularly those with old hard-nosed traditions, for any of this to actually take hold. And so community policing, again, no doubt, because of a lot of funding, it was certainly ascending. I'm not saying it was ascending necessarily for real, maybe in rhetoric. At the same time, police militarization was occurring. And at this point, I think the end of the story is real clear. There are two strains of community policing. Put some of you old heads in here like this. Transinuants, Lou Radlin. They were these police reformers back in the day that had a very progressive idea of community policing, truly empowering the communities they're working with, a real kind of grassroots sort of community organization model, and the police would be a part of that movement. And they wrote up all kinds of neat stuff, and a lot of departments tried to go with it, etc. Let's call that the progressive leg of community policing, or strain. That's a better word, a strain of community policing. But then we had George Kelling, James Q. Wilson, other folks that wanted to see a more hard-nosed type of community policing. They didn't even want to call it community policing, but they figured it was a juggernaut, so they went ahead and jumped on board. But they said, you know what? Community policing is all about fixing the little problems in a community. For them, what does that mean? Order maintenance, or what they called order enforcement. Which means you really knock the shit out of a lot of low-income people for all kinds of things, trying to create order in a perceived space of disorder. Well, what won out? CompStat, NYPD, LAPD, all these various places that, Philadelphia, all these places that have been doing the same crap they've done for a long time. Now, under the auspices of the war on terror, they can do what they've wanted to do. Community policing, even the Community Policing Office under the Department of Justice is writing publications saying, we're watching it die. Great quote, by the way. You'd think that democratization and militarization would be at odds with one another, and cops would be real confused. Oh, do we democratize or do we militarize? What the hell do we do here? So what do? The only people that are going to be able to deal with these problems, guns, drugs, gangs, community disorder, are highly trained tactical teams, militarized teams with the proper equipment to go into a neighborhood and clear the neighborhood and hold it, allowing community policing officers to come in and start turning the neighborhood around. Yeah, what does that sound like? The war model, right? Yeah, you conquer territory and then you restore it. So operationally, they made great sense of it. Yeah, let's do community policing, let's do the weeding, it's called, and we'll weed out all the bad stuff, and then we'll come back and seed. Well, of course, the problem is policing can actually do a pretty damn good job of weeding. I'm not saying it ends up controlling crime, but they can make a hell of a lot of arrests. But they have very little history of constructive seeding. This is throwing seeds, by the way.
Where's that quote from?
That is from my research, yeah.
Is that you're quoting yourself, or?
Yeah, I made that quote up. Yeah, I do that a lot. No, it's I think it's in the social problems piece, ages ago. But I ended up doing, as part of 2 national surveys of police departments, I've conducted over 120 interviews, either face-to-face or telephone interviews with SWAT commanders. And so I've got a lot of really great quotes. One of the quotes I wrote, I was scared to put it anywhere else. Please excuse me, I was untenured and kind of crapping a brick about all the stuff I was doing. So I put it only in a footnote, but one SWAT commander talked about how you can't imagine what it's like when you bring in the SWAT team and you watch those blacks scatter. Yeah, I put that in a footnote. That's in the social problems piece. Why the hell I didn't highlight it? Hell, today I'd be putting that on a banner and shaking it in the air, but back then, I had lots of people tell me, Kraska, you're not going to get tenure. This isn't going to go well for you. Your family is screwed. And to some extent, I've gotten taken on pretty well, but I've weathered the storm. Not that big a deal. Certainly not like getting pepper spray in the eye or getting hit with a stick or something like that, which, knock on wood, hopefully won't still happen. All right. Let me see how much time I've got. All right, we're supposed to be done at 6:30?
If you want to get questions.
Yeah. Are y'all dying for questions? Okay, let's discuss things, but let me see if I've got anything else I want to get to. This is the moment where I'm just going to run through crap. Navy SEALs worship. Huge part of policing right now is the worshiping of military special operations folks. Now you might say, oh, that's weird. That's a huge part of our culture, right? How many damn movies do you watch that the ultimate masculine figure is an ex-Navy SEALs guy? Super kind, by the way. Wonderful person, but man, he can kill you just by looking at you. Dick Kramer is the artist. This is all about police culture. He's one of the premier artists for SWAT teams and military special operations folks. Notice the caption to this particular picture: "Time to take the garbage out." I was going to talk about masculinity and the strain of toxic masculinity. That's a huge part of what we're seeing with police militarization today. And I think just for you all feminists in here, you all know this. It's very obvious that a lot of this is the backlash to feminism. It's the same kind of toxic masculinity that makes mixed martial art fighting very popular. In fact, I just published a piece in British Journal of Criminology on mixed martial art fighting. And it's the same kind of toxic masculinity. It's huge in policing right now. And the police are terrified of MMA fighters. Why? And it's one of the reasons they're saying we can draw our guns and kill you very quickly. Because what they're saying now is that your pockets are like holsters for your fists. Yeah. And so you let those hands come up, and that's an MMA fighter, and they know how to do all that jiu-jitsu shit and all that stuff. You're going to go down, your gun's going to be gone, they're going to execute you in your head. So take them out first. Any one of y'all really interested in this? Police culture has been hugely impacted by the trilogy. This is called the Holy Trinity of police training. Some people call it the Black Bibles. And it's this person by the name of Charles Remsburg that writes outrageously inflammatory, scary stuff about the various ways that you will be killed as a cop, and you're not going to go home to your family unless you adopt a warrior mindset. And how does a warrior mindset translate to Ferguson? Man, you shoot fast and you empty your frickin' gun. And you don't think. They yell at, I've been to the training, they yell at cops and tell them, they yell at them and say, 80% of cops that are killed never fire their gun. Are you going to be one of those dumbasses? Get that gun out and start shooting. It's a huge part of why what's happening today is happening. And then finally, I was going to just talk very briefly about Obama. He said today that the U.S., he wants to make sure the U.S. isn't building a militarized culture. Yeah, he wants to make sure of that. And by the way he's going to make sure of it is he's not going to cut off the 1033 military transfers program. He's going to give them more training dollars on how to drive an APC. He's going to give more training dollars on how to do what? Use military gear better? And who's going to give that training? Military. Very disappointing. And of course, body cams. You have to have a system of accountability behind the body cams for the body cams to make any damn difference. And clearly we don't have a system of accountability. So you can get all the damn videotape evidence you want. And I know from working as an expert witness in cases, my good friend Vic Kapler used to do a lot of that kind of work. Hell, trying to get any kind of accountability against the police is extremely difficult, even if you have videotape evidence. And I was going to talk about protesting and just the crazy idea. I think it's crazy. I grew up fighting. I grew up hard. And to me, it just seems crazy that all protests have to be completely peaceful. I hate to incite violence, but to me, it's the social contract teaches us that the state gets to do whatever the hell they want. Corey May, I had written out here, Corey May, a black guy in Alabama, grabs his 3-year-old daughter to shield her behind a crib with a handgun because he doesn't know who's breaking into his house. The SWAT team comes through the door, he gets off a lucky shot, kills a cop by shooting him in the neck, realizes the cop, throws a gun down, sits on death row for 8 years. Because he was trying to protect his family. 8 years on death row. And just about 2 years ago, he finally got out of prison after serving 11 and a half years. 8 years in solitary confinement because he's trying to protect his 3-year-old daughter. What does that tell us? The social contract teaches us, all of us tacitly, some of us explicitly, but all of us tacitly, that we have no right to defend ourselves against the state. We have no right to use violence when it comes to the state. Only they get to do it. So we have to do things like just sit there and get sprayed and lay down and do all this stuff and never fight back. And man, if you fight back, good luck for you, right? Just verbally fight back. You know, all these videos floating around now where people are saying things like, hey, you can't arrest me. Really? They can't arrest you. I want them to start putting the videos up where the cop says, I don't give a shit that you're videotaping me. And so on that positive note, I was going to conclude. Thank you.